This is breaking news from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Wolfson. I'm the Clark County District Attorney. I'm going to start off by saying this is a very, very tragic case on a number of grounds. Number one, a respected journalist lost his life in a very brutal, meaningless way. And now we've charged Mr. Robert Tellis with the crime of open murder. And families are affected on both sides. So it is a tragic, tragic case. What you all witnessed just a few minutes ago was Mr. Tellis's initial appearance. The purpose of an initial appearance is for the issue of bail to be considered. And the judge considered information provided to her and decided to continue to detain Mr. Tellis on a no bail status. So there is no bail for Mr. Tellis at this point. The judge continued the case for the initial arraignment until next week. I think it's Tuesday. That court appearance is where Mr. Tellis will be formally charged. He's not been charged yet. He's only been arrested and booked into the county jail. The charging decision is within the district attorney's province. We are now reviewing all of the information. Please understand that I've been involved in this matter since Saturday, telephonically with a number of authorities and a number of people involved in this investigation. I would like to applaud the excellent work of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. They put together their resources in a very short time and developed an investigation and developed a conclusion which allowed them to cause the arrest of Mr. Tellis. The charging decision will be made in the next 24 to 48 hours. I am very, very familiar with the evidence in this case. The evidence is compelling. I expect us to file a charge of open murder against Mr. Tellis. That will be formally announced at the next court date, which is his arraignment. I will now take some questions.
Steve, what was your role in the decision to bring him back home before he was arrested? Was there any way he could be kept with police to avoid that barricade?
Not under the law. There are rules and laws in place which say that a person can be detained for a certain period of time. And once that period of time is over, a decision must be made whether to formally arrest that person or release the person. And you must understand, this was a very fluid, dynamic few hours. The searches were conducted on Wednesday morning, searches of property, searches of persons, the seizure of a lot of evidence. During this time, Mr. Tellis agreed to an interview, and the search of his clothing had to take place, and that was conducted voluntarily with his permission at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. There was an interview, like I mentioned. But at the conclusion of the interview, a decision had to be made whether or not there was enough evidence at that time to continue to detain him. We respect the constitutional rights of somebody who is in custody. At that time, we felt there was not sufficient evidence to continue to detain him. So we allowed for his release, knowing that evidence was literally being developed minute by minute. And as that afternoon, yesterday afternoon, moved along, more information came to us, and we felt comfortable that he should be arrested, and that's why we caused his arrest.
Ultimately, who made that decision, though?
Well, the decision to arrest is a police decision. But I will tell you that I was in communication with law enforcement throughout the day because we work together. It's not uncommon for us to work together to develop cases. This is an important case to this community. So I was in communication with law enforcement as well as some of my colleagues throughout the day.
The information released by police suggests a bigger motive than just a murder alone. It suggests some people saying this is an attack on the free press. Will that have any bearings when you make the decision about the charges that are being brought towards him? And how many do you anticipate that will be brought towards him?
So we are still reviewing all of the information. I anticipate a charge of open murder to be filed. Do we consider other charges? Of course we consider things, but as it stands right now, we expect to file a charge of open murder.
Steve, what are your... Go ahead.
Will you pursue capital punishment in this
It's a
case?
decision that will be made for months, if at all.
Steve, what are your thoughts at this point, early on, with the involvement and the participation on the part of the RJ to give Metro an assist on the arrest?
Well, they were very concerned about one of their employees who had been a long-standing, well-respected employee. Like any employer, they would be concerned with the capture and prosecution of the killer of one of their employees. So yes, we were in communication with the Review Journal because the nature of this case and the nature of Mr. Gehrman's assignments required a good investigator to make inquiry. You know, what was Mr. Gehrman working on? Was he investigating certain persons? Could those persons be the perpetrator? So this is a very unique situation because of who Mr. Gehrman was, who he was employed by, and the nature and circumstances of his assignments.
The judge seemed to imply that Tellis was waiting for Gehrman to be at home. Is that an accurate assessment of it? Was he waiting out at the house for him?
You know, I've read a few police reports, but I haven't read the entire file because literally reports are being dictated as we speak. So I'm not going to speak to the particulars of what Mr. Tellis was doing every single minute during that faithful morning.
Can you elaborate on what evidence came back after he was initially taken in by police and released? What came
Yes,
back?
the DNA evidence. It is compelling. The DNA evidence shows that DNA from Mr. Tellis was found on the hands and perhaps under the fingernails of Mr. Gehrman.
When he returned to the house yesterday afternoon, was there anyone else in the house?
You know, I'm going to speculate that his wife came back home with him, but I don't know who else was in the house.
A quick question. Were search warrants served at any other properties in relation to this investigation? Do you know?
Not to my knowledge, but again, this is just transpiring over the last 24 to 48 hours, so I can't say with 100% that other warrants were served.
I want to make sure I heard what Mr. Scow said, the prosecutor, that Mr. Gehrman came out of the house and was attacked by the defendant. Is it your understanding that he was called out of the house and that he exited through the garage door?
No.
Did he? That was a compound question. Was he
My
called out of the
understanding
house?
is that the facts seem to suggest that Mr. Gehrman may believe that somebody was outside of his home and went out to see who's outside his home.
Does it concern you that this could create a precedent for society and our society here in Vegas that a violent retribution toward a journalist is acceptable?
No violence against anyone is acceptable. When somebody is violent against a journalist, that takes on a special flair, if you will. But this is not the first of its kind. These things have happened throughout this country and other cities. I can remember a journalist being attacked on live television when this journalist was out in the community doing an interview. We're dealing with human beings, and human beings sometimes act irrationally in desperation.
I have one question about how you think he found his address. He was a county employee. Do you suspect that he found it through his job?
I don't know.
Mr. Wolfson, sorry for the late arrival. My understanding from the police sources, it was the DA's decision not to initially charge and allow Mr. Tellis to return home, potentially where he could have run. Can you comment
We're
to that?
only 10 minutes.
I know, running.
So as I said before, I and a number of my assistant district attorneys were in constant communication with law enforcement yesterday from about 8 a.m. till after hours, after 6 or 7 o'clock when he was eventually arrested. There were discussions about the case and about the investigation throughout the day. The ultimate decision to arrest is a police decision. Do they seek guidance? Do they seek input from the DA's office? Of course. because their decision to arrest can and oftentimes does affect our ability to prosecute. But the ultimate decision to arrest was on the part of the police. But yes, I was notified of the forensic evidence finding of the DNA, and yes, I thought it was appropriate to arrest Mr. Tellis at that point.
Beyond what the reporter reported on and what was public, is there knowledge of anything else that was pending about the suspect that
I don't understand your question, I'm sorry.
Beyond what stories were already out there, is there anything else that the reporter may have had knowledge of with regard to the suspect?
I'm still not sure I understand your question, but if I do understand it, my answer is no.
Are there any additional charges that Tellis could face in relation to the fact that he was an elected official, like inappropriate action of elected officials?
I don't think so. There are laws in place for the removal or suspension of a public official, and I believe the county has already addressed that.
Do you think the prosecution has a strong case here?
You know, I make my opinions on strengths and weaknesses of case on the evidence, and the evidence at this point is quite compelling.
You've been watching breaking news from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa.